stories about my family and stories about my faith journey without it being an overt sort of thing. There wasn't a evangelism occurring, but I notice in reflection, and I have a lot of listeners be like, you talk a lot about the wrestling of faith. And I didn't even think about that. I was like, I guess that's just part of my consciousness, is what I'm doing all the time, like most of us are doing here. So how is that intersecting with Catholicism? How did that inspire it? Well, my dad's side, they're Catholic, Italian American and Sicilian American. And so there's a very strong Catholic pull towards the ritual, towards mass, towards so many of the traditions, and the deepening of sort of that. I don't know. There's a seriousness there, if I can say, for lack of a better word, about the approach. At the same time, when my parents got married, my mom wasn't Catholic. I think she was Methodist, and they landed on Episcopalian. And I remember my dad saying, like, hey, it's the same. You go in there. Yeah, he's like, the king wanted a divorce. And then so don't worry. He's like, we're going to get the oil. They're going to do the Nicene Creed, right? We're going to do the Lord's Prayer. So much of it was similar to that mass. And so I would say it was Catholic light. And then I left the church at 13 because I thought I knew everything. I was very clever. I hated the idea of being oppressed. I didn't understand why they didn't take in other religions into account and other ideas. And they wanted me to confirm, and I would not confirm to anybody at 13. And so I left on an intellectual journey, and I started reading Ayn Rand, and I was like, whoa, man. I'm in high school and my mind got blown up. And that was a great start, though, for me. For how it informs my storytelling. And eventually, now I'm 40, but about 35, I started my road back, and the road back, and is still going back to a Christian, not only deepening faith, but in the rituals of at least the cultural Catholic upbringing that I had, using those as an anchor to come back into my faith. So that was the life preserver. That was the hand going through the water in my most difficult time that brought me back. And so I guess there's things about my belief system we could dive into. There aren't necessarily, maybe I'm not Catholic, but I have to say it's that approach. And it's so many of those ritualistic methodologies that I clung back onto and used. The rosary every single day, the things that I saw my grandmother doing, like this. And I was like, okay, so I don't know. And I'm now moving closer and closer, I guess, to conversion in that space. But I still don't know where I'm at, but I'm on that journey. It sounds like you're kind of going, are we passing each other, Kevin?
Maybe, yeah. So it's funny. Something that you said that really struck me was that, like, when you were 13, you said something to the effect of, like, you thought that you knew everything, and then that's what ultimately, like, led to you kind of abandoning faith. And what's funny for me is that, like, it's almost the same for me, just in the opposite direction, because I thought that I knew everything when I was, like, growing up traditionalist Catholic. And I have a lot that I can tell you about my story too. I don't know how much you've picked up from the, couple of conversations you may have seen. But like I thought I knew everything. I thought that I was part of the, select few people who were going to be, saved pretty much, and everyone else, even most of those normie Catholics, the Novus Ordo Catholics, the non-trads, even most of them are going to go to hell probably. That's what I thought. And then I think me realizing that I don't know nearly as much as I thought I did is kind of what caused me to move away from. So maybe that is the same as you almost. Like, we both left. Although no, maybe you left because you thought you knew everything at that time. And maybe I left only once I realized that I didn't know everything. Does that, it's almost the opposite, but almost the same too.
Yeah. And when did as far as the moving away, like, was it deep into adulthood? Was it in your 20s? Was it in your, like, where did you start? Maybe even without making it official, when did that first sort of, and I know you've hit on it before, but just for us, for our context, like, where did that first sort of, like, I'm going to start moving in that direction?
Sorry, this comment was too funny not to put up. John Cena turned heel. I think many will seek the church in this time of turmoil.
You're absolutely right, because I'm a huge wrestling fan. We can go offline and
Oh,
talk about that,
okay.
my friend. Listen, he's right. There is a time right now for reflection on what John Cena did. So continue, Kevin.
Okay.
When did your sort of split, or at least that spark happen for you?
Yeah, so the age that I typically give for like when like that was it. Like that's when I was done is 22. Um
Okay.
because up until I was 22, and just for I'm 29 right now. So that's not
Sure.
ancient history, but it also wasn't yesterday. So um when I was 22, that's when I officially stopped going to mass. I moved
Mhm.
700 miles away from the little tribe community that I grew up in. I got married. That was kind of the whole thing, and those things are related. I was actually kind of forced into a marriage by my triad community.
Mm.
That's like a whole thing. But in some sense, my like deconstruction at least began when I was like maybe 14 or 15, because I grew up a
Mm.
young Earth creationist. Um, and then I went
Uh,
to public school, and my teacher asked me, like the biology teacher, like, how many of you guys think that dinosaurs and man like walked side by side? And I was like, oh, like I think that. And
yeah.
the teacher had to be very kindly had to tell me, like, no, Kevin, like that's not how it was. And
Mm.
yes, actually, it is how it was in the Book of Genesis. That was me. I was that weird kid. Um, but after like I guess a year of studying this stuff and being
Mm.
given permission by a priest to believe in evolution, that's when I started to think, oh, maybe evolution is true. And in some
Yeah.
sense, I look back at that as like the beginning of the end for me.
Mm.
But that I was still very much so Catholic at that time, and I was very much so still Catholic until I was 22. That's typically how I put it.
Can I make a can I bring something up and tell me if I
Yeah.
don't want to drive. I have a tendency as a storyteller to kind of drive.
No, I love it.
So tell me, I'm just curious. So it's funny you said that about the priest who gave you permission to consider evolution. I think for me, it shows the diversity of faith and our individual interpretations of said faith, and then the judgments that come from the certain sects within these faith experiences. So my father went to a Catholic college, Walsh Jesuit in Canton, Ohio, and it was the Jesuit priests who influenced him deeply around service and critical thinking and opening up thoughts about deeper philosophy outside of the paradigm of Catholicism, but also integrating, right? The idea of, St. Thomas Aquinas, we're drawing from a philosophical, we can draw from a philosophical substrate in which it informs and doesn't overcorrect, undercorrect, but informs and accompanies this faith experience that's expressed through whatever we call ourselves. So interestingly enough, I know a lot of people in the Catholic umbrella that in fact inspired me to think more deeply, more practically, more openly about my own faith experience. Now, but then the question becomes, okay, if I want to come back into a Catholic church, the church and that congregation, what do they as people think about this outside of different umbrellas and different, whether it's a conservative approach or more liberal approach? To me, it's always with this kind of stuff mutated by men and women, men predominantly because of this power structure, but men and humans mutated. And so I always find that was my way out in 13 was more or less because it didn't answer a lot of the biological and or physics, the questions that I had about observations, things that I loved about science and theories and quantum physics and string theory. And it's not answering these things. But over time, it's one of these things where I'm like, for me, there is answers for things of the earth and things outside of the earth. And ultimately, at least what pulled me through back into a faith journey and in through the Catholic prism. And who knows, I might ride there and they might go, get out, because maybe I'm too non-traditional to go to a mass, because frankly, a lot of my practice is private. So my wife and we've been married for a while and together for a long time. We have 3 kids. She comes from a Lutheran background. So ultimately we were trying to find, similar to my parents, a compromise. So I go to a UCC congregational church on Sundays, but I go in with my prayer beads And privately, I'm praying the rosary every day and doing my Catholic thing. So I'm feeling this pull. And the question for me is like, well, what's that pull all about? And who's to say who I am, meaning outside of my maker? Go to the private room where only God can see me. He knows what I ask for even before I ask, right? He knows what I'll ask. So I've always viewed, at least my experience, my personal experience with Catholic thinkers, the Jesuit experience, as ones that actually challenge and push against sort of a rigid nature of tradition, which is funny because when you think about rigid tradition and dogma, you're like, well, this seems counterintuitive, but in fact, it actually sparked an opening for me to, when I was going through a really difficult time, as many of us were post-COVID and during COVID and career and life, I ran out of intellectual answers. I could only solve it so much. And as you know, with so many people, when they come back to a faith experience, whether they're an addict, whether they're an alcoholic, whether they have some sort of addiction, whether it's anxiety, whether it's mental health, a crisis, a mistake, whatever they do, you get to a point where you go, I can't do this myself anymore, meaning I can up to a point. And the only thing I can seem to get through this with is grace. Where is that available? It must be available outside of myself, that 13-year-old kid who was too clever. And then it's like, oh, maybe if I speak to, I have a therapist, I go to a therapist every month, every week. And he would always say, have you ever thought about like praying again out loud? It's like, I haven't prayed in like 25 years. I'm 40, so you're a little younger than me. It's like 10 years or so. But I hadn't prayed since I was like 13, 20 years, 35 at the time. And he goes, well, just consider praying where you're just speaking out and starting a dialogue again. I'm like, I'm not starting a dialogue. What are you talking about? I know what this whole thing is. And I remember the act of being so helpless with pressure of work and anxiety. And I just couldn't seem to get myself back to where it was. Just opening that dialogue reconnected me, ironically, with my true self, but the true self could not be accessed through the ego. It could only be accessed by giving away and opening a dialogue to my maker outside. It came back, and then it enlightened this partner that has been with me since I've been a kid, which is, I believe, the nature of God. It's a thing that's always there. It's that voice that kind of goes, it's okay. It's soft, it's quiet. We don't always hear it, but it asks permission. And you have to seek it, right? You seek and you will find, knock and the door will open. It is not invasive. It's not a voice that's going, and it's very distinct from a human voice that tells you you're a sinner, you're going to hell. You think that's a human voice, right? That's, for me, that's sort of a voice of the evil one, as they say, right? And so for me, the true voice is a voice that's present and everlasting and loving, and only can be accessed through humility and sacrifice. And in my way, sacrifice, we know the ultimate sacrifice right? But then there's the sacrifice of the self and the ego to go, I thought I could put this whole thing on my shoulders like Atlas. I am not Atlas. I am doing the best I can, and I can't do it anymore without grace. Humans can't give it to me all the time. And in fact, to ask them of that is asking them and deifying them. That's unfair. They are going to let you down. So this is kind of the whole, but this approach only started and sparked through kind of revisiting my Catholic roots and those traditions. So praying the rosary every day sparked the idea. Okay, even the words sparked the idea. The Beatitudes, listening to them every night, sparked it. Okay, I understand now. There's more questions than answers here. But those questions asked me something of myself that went beyond the understanding and the knowing and all the wonderful things to measure the things of this world. It then gave me a bigger world to consider. And the storytelling part that I love so much is it feels like it's the shortest distance between two souls. To me, a vessel of a story is the thing that connects the duality of the ether, the meta, the thing that we don't know, the thing we have faith in, we don't know is there, we sense, and the thing that we know. And it's a communication that even just asking a question about it, that's your birthright. Being afraid of it, that's your birthright. Being scared of what's next without knowing, that's something we all have in common. And so the storytelling for me is the anchor. It's the way of giving back and receiving a dialogue between the hereafter and what's here. And hopefully for me, it's like, I'm just trying to use it as a way to give, because it's a gift that I have. And I want to do it to be more of the world, not in the world kind of deal. So that's kind of a long way of saying, like, it's interesting how our different experiences sparked a path towards and a path away. But I actually got pulled back in by like, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in, right? That thing, I got pulled back in, dude, from these experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a bunch of thoughts. The first thing I want to tell you, and this is the highest compliment that I think that I can pay anybody, you remind me a lot of my mother-in-law. I love my mother-in-law. She's one of the best people I know.
I do too now.
But
that's awesome.
She talks like so she's, you know what's funny is that she calls herself Buddhist. She doesn't mean that, like, you know, she follows the sevenfold path or whatever. But she does talk a lot about, like, the ego, and how something like the rosary, because she grew up Catholic too, so something like the rosary could be your method of communicating with and she wouldn't say communicating with she and so I'm gonna butcher this, and thank God she doesn't like watch my stuff because I'm butchering it, but she would say something about like how like we're trying to achieve like ego death, and like praying the rosary can put us in communion with other people, and like that is how we achieve ego death and stuff like that. So some of what you were saying reminded me of my mother-in-law, and I mean that in the best possible way, because she's one of the greatest people I know. But something else that I was thinking about too, about your story, well, not about your story, about everything that you said there was how I think you talked for a minute there about so religion is in some sense the thing that people rely upon, which is outside of themselves, to get them through something difficult.
Yep.
And so, you know, obviously, right? Like, of course, right? I think that's like an empirical fact, right? That people do this. And I like to think that that's something that I haven't lost, in the sense that the story that got me through everything used to be, to some extent, like the story that you find in the Gospels. But since I grew up trad, I think to a larger degree, it was actually like the stories of the saints and stuff like that. So like the story of Saint Maximilian Kolbe, or the story of Saint, you know, Christopher, or the story of Saint Michael, there, whatever, whoever's story. Those were the stories that I kind of relied upon to get through hard times. And the stories that I rely upon to get through hard times now are these stories, right? They're over here. And I'm a big reader. Mostly I read like really nerdy fiction stuff. Right there. You can see the final book of the Wheel of Time series. That's a 15-book series. It's huge. There's some Brandon Sanderson somewhere over here. I think that's all Brandon Sanderson right there. I've read every book that Brandon Sanderson has published as part of the Cosmere. That's a Wizard of Earthsea right there. I've got Cradle over there. I could keep going. I love stories too. But the stories that I rely upon today are different than the stories that I relied upon 10 years ago, for instance. So my question to you, and this is, my friend Dave in the comments said that we all know that religious beliefs do help people like achieve happiness, but that doesn't necessarily make them true. So my question to you is this: how important is it that stories are true?
I think that's a great question. I think they address a truth that is the best stories address a truth that is everlasting and infinite without necessarily being true. so you can hold two things at once. So my daughter, to answer your question, my daughter asked me, she's in Catholic school. This is a deeper question as to why. In fact, it was because she was born, my first wife and her, that's our child together, so our only kid. And when our marriage broke up, we had to pick a place for her to go that was in between some places and a safe school and all these things. But it just, ironically, she's at a Catholic school. And so she's talking to me. And interestingly enough, I had some worries about this, only because early on, even at an Episcopalian church, I felt that the seeking part was not emphasized enough, in the sense that it almost felt like the church when I grew up was like that insecure boyfriend or girlfriend who just know your worth. You got the best story, or one of them, right? Top 5 on earth, right? I mean, you could put up there are a lot of other wonderful parables and myths and faiths, right? They're all up there, and they all, some would say equidistant. I'm not here, my point though is you got a pretty freaking great story here, like a story that's unbelievable, that has captured hearts and minds. So be secure in telling that story. And if someone right away isn't ready to dive in, or, it's okay. That grace should be extended. They'll come back. It's the body that's always there, right? The body is always there. And so when you asked about how important, my daughter goes, so like, Dad, what if, like, do we know for sure that Jesus Christ was crucified and then like rose 3 days later? Like, we know 100% sure. Like, is it a fact? Is it a fact? And I said, well, based on my, at the time, like, 40 years of experience, I believe this happened. Okay. But I said to her, what if it didn't? Would that make it less true? And she was like, well, no. She's like, well, yes, it would, because like, no, but what I'm saying is what the story represents. Let's just say, for the sake of arguments, and I know sometimes I get eviscerated in faith communities because I'm like, let's just a thought experiment. Don't worry, or we're not leaving the church. So it's like, what if it wasn't? Is the story, I said, do you find value in sacrifice for the ones that you love? She said, yeah. I said, do you find that finding available love and grace and compassion for people in the midst of biological suffering is a value? She goes, is that something to aim towards? She goes, yes. Do you find that there's a transformative experience that occurs, a transformation of a suffering that can occur through the act of compassion and love? And can it be applied here on earth? Like, is there actual ways to apply it tangibly now? She's like, yeah. So then I said, it's true. And what I mean by that is, you're right. There are, and I believe that it's true. What I'm saying is, how important is it? Well, if the meta truth isn't true, then it's not true. If the heart and soul truth isn't true, if it's corrupt and it leads towards the physical world and the ends of this world and the desires and the greed of this world, don't follow that story. But if the story leads you to a place in which you can actually have the choice to say, is this literally true that the Son of God was crucified, died, and rose 3 days later to do the thing that was delivered and promised? If you believe it, and you get two truths, one that you have to have faith for and one that you know, because the knowing exists in the meta substrate and what you know to be true, because those things can be applied here. And at the end of that story, there's only grace and love. There's no credit card number. There's no conversion. There's no everyone else is going to hell and I'm going to heaven. There is no self-interest in that truth.
Yeah. And so that brings up,
that's it.
So, I love everything that you just said. I do. That was not my experience of Catholicism growing up. Not at all. We were very much so we were the trads, right? We loved the preaching of the fewness of the saved and stuff. It was fire and brimstone, that's what it was. And so I think a large part of what caused me to stop calling myself Catholic altogether, instead of kind of becoming more of like a mystical Catholic, if I may kind of refer to the kind of
Sure.
faith that you just described as like a mystical Catholicism, is
Yeah.
because what I associated Catholicism with was opposition to marriage equality, for instance.
Yes.
And I had gay friends, and I was like, no, like, therefore I'm discarding all of this. So what do you do with, I guess, how do you marry the two? How do you marry kind of the mystical Catholicism with, you know, the physical body of the Catholic Church that does put forward statements that are, you know,
Yeah.
very clear about, like, no, like, you know, gay marriage should not be ever sanctioned ever. Yeah. So like, how?
Yeah. It's a battle I'm going through right now, and the answer is I don't know, but I'll tell you what I try, what it seems to be, which is just like any body, it's imperfect. And if you're aiming towards perfection, you start with imperfection. And so to aim towards a more perfect body of Christ, whatever you call that, in whether it's the Catholic manifestation of that, or whatever anybody has that faith experience, traditional, mystic, it's like, okay, this is the place where we gather and we have particular ideas associated with that. But the question is, where is it moving towards? And, you know, one of the reasons why I really like this Pope, and, you know, I know that it's actually like the first time in my life I was ever concerned for a Pope's health was recent, because I love this guy. And a lot of people don't. I know a lot of traditionally that do not. And I think it's because I sense in him more of the, I don't want to say mystical, but what I'm saying is more of a open-hearted, and he has demonstrated this and has been really kind of by a lot of folks taken to task for saying, listen, you know, you're opening it too much, meaning you're letting folks in that, you know, it's like, I like his approach. And is it far enough in terms of being able to bless gay marriage? No. I mean, if my point of view, no, I have a gay son. I don't think it is. But then now what we're talking about here is the actualization of like the Catholic Church as we agreed to here and what that means. And then it's like, or is it our own personal church, our own Catholic Church? And this goes to more of a non-denominational thing where it's it's your personal relationship with Jesus Christ, right? It's this kind of thing. And what I'm saying is, I think Catholicism can be deeply personal. I think all of the saints and the stories that you talked about, all of those who are converted, oftentimes came to that, and we know this in the stories, came from that place of not only being non-Christian, but in so many cases, right? We're looking at St. Paul, they're watching the crucifixions of Christians. When you see that the possibility of conversion and grace, even for those folks, then you go, wait a second, this kind of mercy in this story doesn't line up with the institutionalization of said body, whatever body that is. And I think that goes for all churches. They're all battling. The Methodist Church is battling, right? They are splitting. There's all these things, and it's people fighting about a truth that has been given to them. And so where I tried, maybe this is where the mysticism comes in, or as you said, I think it's a great way to say it. I don't take it as like a woo-woo thing.
Good.
I think it's a way
I didn't
of
mean
approaching.
it in a woo-woo way, so I'm glad that you.
No,
Good.
dude.
Good.
No, it's funny
Good.
because honestly, dude, like the Jesuit priests, I don't want to say it's mystic, but there is something kind of like contradictory about a lot of their approach. And I think maybe that had a big deal to do with it too, is that it was like, I don't know, man. I'll tell you this. Like my favorite kind of like Catholic priest that I grew up with is the guy who's just like conflicted on a street corner with a cigarette. And you're just like, right? It's just like, wait, he's a street priest. You know what I'm saying? A street priest. And it's almost as if he's on the last leg of his faith, but something there tells him, okay. So I guess what I'm saying is, for me, I have an experience of the Catholic faith that is different than yours, clearly. But it lets me know that just like our humanity, just like our country specifically, the diversity actually is in its strength, and that doesn't always line up with the hierarchy and how it's built. So on my journey back, maybe I journey back and it's a personalized form And that could be considered a sin. How could you take, you don't get to cherry pick. It's like, well, I don't know, man. I'm not saying there's cherry picking, but what I'm saying is that there is for me, an umbrella that opened up, and through that specifically, because I did the tour of religions. When I left 13, I did we did the Buddhist thing. By the way, valid, beautiful faiths, right? The interfaith dialogue isn't just a thing for me about like, let's just say it and say, no, it's like learning from those perspectives, so important, but it takes security. My thing is, listen, if you have a knowing, and I've listened until I was 35 years old, I had no sense of true faith in God. I believed in God, I had no faith. The thing that called me back into faith was that first prayer, and through living through the temple of Jesus Christ. I was resistant. And I'll tell you, there's a really brief, I love that cat, by the way.
That's Molly.
There's a really brief but important, what's her name?
Her name's Molly.
Molly.
Cat tax. Here we
Hey,
go.
Molly.
There she is.
Look
at the camera.
I love you.
There she is. She's cute.
She's like, I will not look at this. That's awesome. I remember I told you about my wife and I, my first wife, when we went through the divorce. I'll give you a quick anecdote and then I'll pass it over to you. I was trying to save the marriage, not because the marriage was going to or should have worked.
Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. I just thought this comment was really funny. He says, "Well, Aaron, I'm not a priest."
I saw that. Last like I've ever. Hey, man, you're hanging out there, bro. I wouldn't doubt if you have a trench coat on as a cigarette and you're just sitting there 25 years. Listen, it took me 25 to get back to the first step in, right? And I'm still at that list. I think that's the point. I think it's okay to be comfortable being on the last leg. The last leg for me is, why hast thou forsaken me, right? The last leg is this. At the end point of our human experience, we reach a point of no return, and it's a choice that has to be made. And I'm not here to judge what choice that is. I know for me, I got to a point where it was like, and I had all this sort of buffet to choose from. Nothing answered it for me. Everyone has their own thing. For me, then how can I do this? And it's exemplified really quickly in this quick parable, which is, I guess, a parable for my own life. At the end of the marriage, I was trying to save the marriage with my wife, but I was trying to save it not because I wanted the marriage to work. We were still friends. It just was not going to work in terms of a long-term commitment. That was difficult for us. We got married in a Catholic church. It was very difficult, but we realized it was the best thing. What I was trying to save before is I had a 1-year-old daughter. And at the last leg of this relationship, I ended up spending all my money, going nearly bankrupt, to buy a townhouse to try to save the marriage. The idea, how you get in these relationships and you think this will save it. And I said, we're going to move from this crummy apartment. I'm going to show you that this dream as a storyteller is going to make it. So I just take all this money. I take loans from people I knew I couldn't pay back. And I get this townhouse, and we tried the experiment of living there and saving the marriage for a month, and it didn't work. And after a month, she left. And at the time, my daughter and I were best friends to this day, but she left and she goes, hey, I'm going to be moving here. I'm going to be, our daughter's going to be with me. We're going to have to figure out arrangements. It's done. So I was in this moment in the house at night, 1, 2 in the morning. It's the first time in my life I've ever been like, holy shit. I'm looking down a hallway, dude. And I'm an optimistic guy and a little bit of a hypochondriac. So I've never had thoughts of self-harm, but that was the close where I'm looking down that hallway. That's a dark, and it's the metaphorical hallway of my life, where everything I said I was going to do, every promise I made myself that I wouldn't get divorced because my parents did, which is an unfair one, but I promised myself, I won't do this. And to see the potential the potential pain to my daughter left me conflicted, the pain that I was going to recreate this cycle. And I'm sitting in this house. I swear to you, I'm in this townhouse. The woman that I did a rent to own, by the way, because I didn't have good enough credit to buy the house. So I had to do a rent to own. So not only am I bankrupt, I'm in this terrible contract, but it's with this woman who is a Catholic. And I'm looking around the walls. I just moved in. We didn't even take stuff off the walls because she used to live there. And there's all of these Catholic symbols everywhere, all the saints. And at this time, I'm looking around. I'm like, this is like a movie. This is like the Hallmark movie where I'm like, this is the moment. And that's right. I'm very, very almost skeptical of this, because I had this feeling of like, I felt this calling. And I'm like, don't lie to me. Don't screw with me. Like, don't make me lean into something that I don't truly believe in. But I knew I needed something in that moment that I couldn't think myself through. I needed something to figure out a way to transform this moment. How do I transform this moment? Do I have that in my power? Is that available to me? And I swear to you, I've told this story on my podcast, this little thing falls off the wall and kind of floats down like the feather in Forrest Gump, slowly, like cinematically. It falls to the ground, and I pick it up, and it's a prayer card. I think it had, I can't remember, St. Christopher or St. Anthony, who it was. I have St. Christopher on my neck, but it was a saint, and I turned it around, and it just had one of the quotes, and the quote was, "Behold, I make all things new." And then I'm like, here we go. I'm like, so then my mind, being more of a scientist, or, I'm like, it's just coincidence. I'm looking for meaning, right? So I'm always looking for ways to figure out that this is a ruse. I'm always looking, this is a ruse. I'm being had. Well, in that moment, I decided not to accept it as a ruse and accept it, whether it was intentional or circumstantial, a sign for me to try to do something different to transform it. And what it was that I transformed was, one, can I go through this process of divorce and not worry about being right, but worrying about loving my daughter no matter what? Myself did not want to do that. I want to win every argument. I want to call out injustices. I want to be factually correct and let the person know across from me. Is my father being a lawyer growing up? I'm going to let you know that your contention is wrong. And I'm going to tell you how it is wrong and how it's going to basically doom all of humanity because of it. I'm very competitive. And so in that moment, man, I'm looking and I'm like, that's what I want to do. For me, what is all the upbringing I had? What am I called to do? What is the perfect sacrificial life look like? And I'm like, well, let me try the Jesus Christ thing. So what would he do? Okay, he would forgive, even though it hurts. He would not worry about being wrong, even though it hurts. And he would make sure that the love that I have for my daughter and that I had for the relationship that was ending would transform and become something new. How do I make that cross, something from my cross, an instrument of torture, into something that transforms into a symbol of hope? How do I do that? It's through the act of carrying the cross. It's through the act of taking that and doing it gracefully. So I did it. She's 11 now, year after year after year after year. What happened there because of that for me was so beautiful. The grace that was given me, the gift I was given through how she views our relationship, the friendship I have, and it didn't feel good. Like there was not myself, intellectual Aaron, I would have devoured that relationship and poisoned it because I would be fighting all the time. So what it let me know is I had the potential in me to be a better person. But to your point about ego death, I had to literally die to myself first to be reborn. And if I'm going to be reborn, I want the best parts of myself to be aimed at the best story I know, at the most sacrificial life that I know of in the ancient texts. And that for me was that was Christ. And so again, I'm telling you the story, but I was kind of unwillingly, I wanted to be like Carl Sagan guy. I wanted to be like, hey, listen, and I love Carl Sagan. I want to be like, listen, I don't need any help or faith. I just know biology. Or like, listen, I'm friends with Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's all good. The only voice, the only body that ever transcended my experience was me getting on my knees and praying to God. The only thing that ever gave me a second chance was living in the life of putting that cross on and following him. And we made fun of shit like that for my whole life. I made fun of Christians. I made fun. I was like, oh, you guys are idiots. What are you talking about? Until I'm at that crossroads. And so I have a respect for not only the Catholic faith, for their determination and staunch stance about their belief system, but I also know that sometimes there needs to be an openness to let folks into the umbrella, and that can change that body. So I just wanted to share that with you. That was a real personal. I've actually never, I've one time on my podcast, but I've never been on a show like this. I'm usually talking about storytelling and all that kind of stuff as an act, right? But this is different. And this, but what informs everything I do is what I'm telling you right now. What informs every single thing I do is, can I leave the world better than I found it? Can I tell stories that help change? And those stories on the wall behind you, by the way, I believe are the reflections of God. I mean, the beautiful stories in this world are a reflection of the divine, and they are valid. And, I know a lot of religions like, well, they're not valid. It's not from the text. No, these are the reflections of light, man. So
I don't talk about this a whole lot on my channel, but when I was in college, when I was 22, when I was kind of like deconstructing all this stuff, I wouldn't say, like, I don't want to like cheapen the experience of people who actually battled with alcoholism. I wouldn't exactly say that I was an alcoholic, but it got kind of bad for a minute. Like, I was drinking at like 8 a.m. and stuff like that. So it was troubling, at least. And that book right there, let's see if I can kind of that one. That's a trilogy of books right there. It's called the Mistborn Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. That story, I think to this day, gave me the hope to, it put me in the right headspace, I think, to not let it get any worse than it did. And I think that is the power of a good story. And I brought up that book too because I wanted to mention that the author of that book, Brandon Sanderson, is a very devout Mormon. And you might think, okay, so if he's a devout Mormon, then that probably means that he's also, homophobic and stuff like that. He's not. He has gay characters in his books, and his books are like Lord of the Rings style epic fantasy. And he has gay characters in there, which is like quite progressive. And in interviews, people have asked him, like, how do you square these two things? You're a devout Mormon and you're cool. And he says, yeah, he considers himself a progressive Mormon. And he thinks that he can change the church from within, because I think, like the Catholic Church, the Mormon Church is also kind of institutionalized. And so a lot of what you were saying about the Catholic Church, it can be changed as long as all of its members, kind of push it to make the changes. You reminded me a lot of Brandon Sanderson right there, because I think that he says the same thing about the Mormon Church instead of the Catholic Church, but it's similar. And I wanted to add a note about the Jesuits too. I've been reading through this book called All Oppression Shall Cease by a certain Father Kellerman. He is a Jesuit.
Okay.
And this book is really cool because it looks at the history of slavery in the Catholic Church. And I was simultaneously reading another book called The Popes and Slavery by a different priest, Father Panzer. The Father Panzer book was written in 96. The Father Kellerman book was written in 2021 or 2022. So quite different. The Father Panzer book it's slavery apologetics. It's like, oh, slavery isn't actually that big of a deal when you think about it. So the church was fine for supporting slavery. Father Kellerman, on the other hand, is saying, no. The church did awful, terrible things in the past, and we're not going to do them moving forward. We're going to be better. We can change. We have changed. We will continue to change. Even including on moral teachings, because the church did used to teach that slavery is okay. But Father Kellerman's point is we've learned, we've made moral progress. And then Father Kellerman ends his book by saying, I think that we can continue to make moral progress on topics like marriage equality, on whether the priesthood should be reserved only for men, things like that. Those things can be changed and they should be changed per Father Kellerman. And that's something else that reminded me, just what you were saying too. Number one, because you brought up the Jesuits, but then number two, change from within. And I greatly respect that. And it's also completely alien to me. And I say that because the community that I grew up in was very much so like, nope. Like if a church council ever proclaimed something infallibly, let him be anathema, boom, it can never change ever again. That's why I grew up a young earth creationist, right? Among other things. So it's just very foreign to my experience of Catholicism, but also something that I am deeply in favor of and I think is super, super cool.
Let me ask you, Kevin. Yeah. So it's interesting because I know exactly what you're talking about. It's something I could never square about religion as a whole. And in no way, it's interesting because when I say things and I hear you say things and I say things like the Catholic Church should change. I know people who are devout Catholics who are like, who the hell are you? Like, what are you talking about? Not changing anything. But I guess I I guess it's always a question of what is the church and what is the church, in the sense that, or maybe what's the church and what is the body, right? And I think it's the same thing if we take it to and I'm very careful of this because I'm all about unifying principles, and I've always been able to talk across the aisle with a lot of things. But when you look at the state of our country, right, it's the same thing. What is our country? And what is actually the country? And when you hear all the time from artists and people who travel around the world, I used to tour as a storyteller, and you hear from people who spend a lot of time in communities that don't have a political agenda, they're always going to tell you there's good and there's bad. There's things that we need to fix. There's things that we need to keep doing right. But oftentimes you hear the narrative of it's a complicated, beautiful, diverse place. And that most people, even despite those diversities, and you hear it all the time in rhetoric, there's more in common than we have not in common. And I actually think this is a true thing. What ends up happening is ultimately people in positions of power, whether it's religious, whether it's political, whether it's social, whether it's influencers, they determine the narrative. And then they have the levers of power to then say what something is. So I'm not here to say what Catholicism is. What I'm saying is, to me, my experience is that it's what it is actually different in terms of the people that I've met, the diversity that's there. And you're right, there's diversity of absolute traditionalists, but then there's also a lot of liberal Catholics that I know. It's like, well, then what is it? What is Catholicism? And is it this thing that's dictated by, I don't know. What I know is that the body represents what it is. And what it is oftentimes isn't in congruence with the levers of power that want one singular message. And here's my point of being a religious person in general, or a Christian. The only singular message is that of Jesus Christ and God. That's the message. So for me, if it's not congruent with that, if I'm hearing stuff about like, if it's not congruent with that, and again, what is its interpretations, right? And that's what's so difficult, because it's told in a parable. So much of it is in parables, at least in the teachings of Christ, right? It's like, it can be interpreted, all these things. And so the free will of interpretation in and of itself seems like kind of a weird gag to pull on people, because it's like, wouldn't you just say like, there is no absolute, but doesn't that kill the human spirit and the free will of being able to make a choice? It's the same thing as if like you were to keep your kids in a bubble and never let them go and tell them exactly what they're going to do. That's not love. What a sacrifice it must be if you are a creator to create and allow experience. What a sacrifice that must be. As a parent, I know my every instinct is like, I'm taking my kids. They are going to be like in the house. They will not be exposed to terrible things. They'll only see sunshine and rainbows. I want that because I want no pain for them. I want no pain. But I also know it is not love to tell them that they can't experience pain and suffering, or to not make their own. I can inform them. I can teach them. I can arm them, if you will, with the teachings and the things that I know, as imperfect as it is, to go out there and keep that true self, keep that connection with God and family, and allow that to navigate them. And that is always there, that it was in me and it was passed on, but it was given to me. I didn't create it myself. That's the thing. I didn't create this thing. I was gifted this life, gifted. And even in the worst times, I used to not pray when it was the worst. I would always go, I'm going to get back to you when I'm feeling better and not as anxious and things are great. What am I doing? No, that's the time. And it's time when it's good and when it's bad. And so when it's good, it's thank you. And when it's bad, it's thank you. Where are you available despite this suffering? I know you're here. Where are you available? And are you the sunshine coming through the window when I'm sick? Are you the memory of my daughter when I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay the mortgage next month, right? Where are you? And it's always there when I seek. And so, yeah, man, when you talk about, especially that author and being Mormon, I have a lot of Mormon friends actually here in Ohio that are similar in the sense that you have that kind of stereotype, but they're different. They're kind of going, actually, no, I actually believe this thing. But so it tells me always that like the messaging center, the thing that institutions or countries or positions of power, they consolidate messages to try to simplify something that cannot be simplified, which is there is a diverse body of believers within all of these places, and it's up to them to decide what works for them or not. But I would agree, any sort of like oppression of like openness and love and compassion seems to be not congruent with the message of Christ. And so maybe I'll find on my pursuit of not just being Catholic ritualistically now, or moving into a space where my prayers are centered through the Catholic prism, maybe I'll find that I don't end up at a Catholic church because they don't accept someone like me. But does that mean that those things that come down through that prism aren't good? That's, I don't know the answer. And I'm wondering with you too, like you had this version, but maybe that's not the thing in and of itself. It's just the reflection of this thing. You know, it's like, I'm not trying, you have your journey. I'm just saying like, I've experienced that. And it's kind of like, wait a second, I'm realizing it's usually when it hits the human filtration process, shit goes down. We screw it up. And that goes back to original sin. It's always like, we screw it up for ego, for survival, because we're biologically tethered to want to feel comfortable and not want to be challenged. The biology tells us one thing, the spirit tells us something else. The biology tells us one thing, the spirit tells us something else. And that's the conflict. That's the smoking priest, man. That's the guy, your commenter's 25 years. He's right there. And it's just the leaning into that contradiction. That's okay to me, man, it's the contradiction. It's the journey in and out, because I wasn't there for 20 years, but when I found there was no sense of like guilt, it was like, I've been here the whole time. But when you go into then the structure that humans not only encompass, but embody, that's where the feeling of judgment comes. That's where the feeling of like, you're going to do it this way. That to me sounds like a dictator. That to me sounds like someone who wants to oppress because they want to be right. My thing is, are you interested in being right? Or are you interested in being faithful? Faith and fact are different. And if you're relying and using faith to prove a fact, you're going to find nothing. Because we're not in the business of facts. We're in the business of faith in the absence of knowing. And this is a deeper knowing that you can't explain and you shouldn't push on others, but that you know inside. And all we're called to do, I believe, is share that good news in a way that's loving and compassionate. So again, maybe it's mystical, maybe it's non-traditional, maybe I'll find myself going, continuing to go to this UCC church, but I can't deny that so much of my private practice is through that Catholic lens, and it's been so important to me. And the devotion to Mary has been important. So I have my own philosophies. I'll stop now about what draws me to it, but I'm also in that cross section where exactly the same place, because you're kind of, I'm stepping in, I'm going, do I want to go all the way in? In terms of what they say that it is.
Right.
Maybe what this thing is just a personal sort of like buffet. But all I know is that it speaks truth to me, and it's been transforming, man. It really has.
Good. Yeah. And I just want to add like a quick comment about what is the church? So what I grew up thinking, being told the church was a collection of doctrines that have been passed down to us through tradition, and these doctrines are outlined at church councils and by the priest or by the Pope, and that's it. It's cut and dry. That's it. If you don't accept all of these things, right, you're not part of the club. Get out of here. We don't want you. That is the religion that I grew up with. And so when I talk about Catholicism, perhaps I'm not being fair. Perhaps I'm painting with way too broad of a brush, because I'm referring to that when I talk about Catholicism. But then you ask this question, what is the church? Well, isn't the church just the collection of her members?
Yeah.
And if that is what the church is, then most of the church doesn't accept everything that the church, by my previous definition, teaches. Something like 67%, like 2/3 of Catholics don't think that using contraception is wrong. But that's an official Catholic stance, that it is wrong to use contraception. So if that is the case, then when I'm critiquing Catholicism, I'm really only critiquing 1/3 of, I'm only critiquing
Right.
a small fraction of Catholics. If I may make that
Mhm.
distinction between Catholicism and Catholics, and that's not to say that the former definition is correct and the latter definition is not correct. That's just me trying to differentiate between the two. So yeah. So everything that you said there, and here's the thing too, is I think that if the church more accurately reflected her members,
Mhm.
I don't think I would have a YouTube channel, truthfully,
Mhm.
because I think that
Mm.
I think the church would be a much better place if she listened to more of her members. Yeah. Um, and
The changing of that though, Kevin, I wonder if the change happens. Um, it's kind of like in a way like a democracy where like, it's like you have this will over time to be more of a fair, loving, compassionate country, but the laws and the uh bylaws and federal state all this didn't always reflect that will, right? Because if you poll, sometimes it did, sometimes it did. So to me, it's an ever-changing body, and so we don't know what that looks like in 40 years. What I think you're saying, what I believe, regardless of, is that it is dictated from uh the the message, right, to then the people, and then from the people sprouting up to inform the structure. And my mom always used to say, and I love this, she goes, focus on the light, not the lamp.
hmm,
Don't focus what you're talking about reminds me of that, which where there are iterations of certain, any religion but Catholics, and it's like they're focused on the lamp. And I understand why, because man, structure is important. As a storyteller, you got to have structure. You got it. When I tell a 7-minute story, I'm structured. I got 7 and some change to get across this message and tell this story. Sometimes it's this, but the point of it is the structure is just the space to allow creation and love and experience to exist. The structure isn't the thing itself. And I think the focus has always been lost on the structure and not the light. And I think there's this duality. It's a conduit for the light. And so it's for us to worship the lamp, we got to give its dues. We got to say, thank you, lamp. Thank you for the people who invented lamp. I like lamp. But what I'm actually after here is the light in which it produces. And that's where I think people get lost. That's where it's like, these are the bylaws. This is the lamp. You got to get
yes.
this kind of lamp. You see kind of lamp you got in the house. The lamp's got to be like this. It's like, no, I love that we need architecture for the lamp. Got to have some structure. Probably on Sundays, got to step in and say thank you to the lamp. But the light in which it produces, that's the aim, right? And I think that's where this conflict kind of, where we see across generations of people who are in and out of faith experiences. And someone just said in the comments, it's like there is a delineation between the church itself and actually the church or the faith. And I think that's omnipresent and ever going. And dude, having channels like yours, like this is a great experience, like being able to even have a real dialogue about these contradictions and about this stuff is like such a gift. So yeah, man, thank you for even housing this and building a community here of people who consider this stuff, because it only moves us forward, dude.
I'm very blessed to have friends like Midnight Philosopher here, like Pick and Choose, like Daniel, who put us in contact with one another. I think that the thing that even if all 5 of the people I just mentioned might be on very different stages or places within their journey, the one thing that I think that we all share is a radical openness. At least I like to think so. A radical openness, and a willingness to kind of wrestle with God a little bit, and to say, like, yeah, sometimes I think it is about the journey more so than the destination.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, I've kept you for a long time. I did say though that I was going to bring up Steve Vai, so I want to just mention real quick that I've seen
Yep.
Steve Vai in concert twice. How many times have you seen Steve Vai in concert?
4 times.
4
But you have
times.
something that I do not have, but you have something that I am envious of. And here is my natural human self being not, but I'm looking, and you have something there. I believe you said before we started taping, you could tell I'm born in 1983. I said taping. Um, you have an autograph from him, right? Did you do?
I do.
Can you talk? Can you take me through the meet and greet so I can live vicariously through you? There's my dad joke. I'd love to hear. So, was it at a concert that you did a meet and
Hmm.
greet, or was it like a conference thing? How did that
Yeah.
come about?
So it came about because my wife got me meet and greet tickets to a Steve Vai concert.
Ender Surrender.
Great
Yeah.
song, Pick and Choose. But not just regular concert tickets, meet and greet concert tickets. So I went to go see Steve Vai in Louisville.
Hmm.
This would have been November 2022, so a year 2022, 2023, doesn't matter. I showed up to the concert venue in Louisville. The concert didn't start until 8 o'clock or whatever. We got there at like 4 o'clock or something. And so we walked in, and there was somebody behind a booth like giving us these special badges that we needed. And nobody said anything to him, but I was almost positive that was Fire Vi, Steve Vai's son. So when I got up to him, I'm like, I'm so sorry. Are you Fire? And he goes, yeah, that's me. I'm like, oh, it's so cool to meet you, dude.
Sweet.
Yeah, so I'm such a nerd that I recognize Steve Vai's son just from following Steve on his Instagram.
Awesome.
He also looks just like Steve Vai, so like he's just a young Steve Vai. But regardless, they gave us special badges. We went not exactly like backstage, but like side stage, I guess, to this like waiting room where they sat us down at these tables. And then Steve came out. And we did like an hour-long Q&A session. And so obviously he wasn't able to take a question from everybody because there was probably like 30 or 40 of us who had these tickets. But he did take one of my questions. And my question actually wasn't about music or guitar. And a lot of questions were kind of like, where do you get inspired to write your music and stuff like that? I'm sure he's answered that a million times. My question was about meditation because Steve Vai is all into the Zen kind of meditation stuff. So he spent like 20 or 30 minutes on my question. And I felt really bad because I think that my question took so long to answer that other people didn't get to ask their questions. But it was really cool. So then,
well, you tapped into something important for him, right? You tapped into that. I've heard him talk a lot about that, and you're right. It's not a surfaced question. Oftentimes, it's usually like, "Please tell me how you play the for the love of God" or something. And the guy behind you, I'm sure, is like, "I just wanted to get to the question about how he did that one pull off." Right? That's cool though that you were able to do that.
And then after that, we all walked down to the stage, and we took pictures with Steve, like in front of the stage with the Hydra guitar, like immediately above us. So I have a picture of like, me, Steve Vai, my wife, and then immediately above us is the Hydra. So that's like one of my favorite pictures ever. It's so cool. It's like the coolest thing I've ever done. And I'm, it's all downhill from here. But yeah, it was awesome.
What an amazing, I'll end here because I'll talk forever about it, but I'll just say one of the greatest composers and musicians for me as a young guitar player, because I played guitar growing up, obviously, and I got into prog rock and I got into stuff, and that's where I found Vai and Satriani and Dream Theater and all these guys because I wanted to shred.
I'm seeing Dream Theater in a couple weeks. Sorry,
bro. No, okay. Here's the thing. Let me talk. I gotta talk to Portnoy. I know he just joined the band again. I gotta talk to Petrucci. Guys, I don't know what's going on. They're supposed to come to Cleveland. The tickets were over $200. Listen, here's the deal, guys. I understand. I love you guys. They were so expensive. I was like, what? And don't get me wrong, I love that. I'll pay money, but I was just surprised. I was like, that would be like $700 just to sit in the. Dude, that's amazing that you're gonna go see them. They're incredible. I love Dream Theater, and I saw when it was the G3 tour with Petrucci, Satriani, and Vai.
Oh, you saw Satch, Vai, and Petrucci at G3?
Hell yeah.
That's the best lineup. Oh, that is so cool. I'm so jealous.
I drove from Cleveland to Detroit, my buddy and I, who was my drummer, and we went up there, and we were this was a while ago, dude. So I'm just aging myself a bit, but it was so great. And Vai, though, I remember, took me on that journey of true sort of singing through the instrument. And I found actually like a lot of his voicings when I kind of went down the track of playing guitar professionally and then kind of shifted over to storytelling and performing, one of the things that helped was just some of his philosophy about speaking through the instrument and philosophically, right? I'm sure that was informed by a lot of the spiritual and meditative stuff, because for me, I never seen the voice as an instrument before, even storytelling. And then I realized, wait a second, that may not be my career, my profession, but I found something here in voicing and storytelling that's an instrument. So I always think about his approach artistically as a storyteller
Yes.
to the guitar, right? How he tells stories. It's not just shredding. It's like, and I listen to that music not just as a nerd, but also just like he's saying and telling a story. And I
Yes.
want to do the same thing with my little story. So yeah, dude, I have such respect for him and his composition and his work. And it's not just shredding. It's beautiful. So yeah, dude, that's so cool. You got to meet him. One of these days, man, one of these days I'll get to
Hey, I'm super
hopefully
jealous that you
interview
got to
him
see
or,
G3.
talk
I've
to him.
never
Pretty cool.
seen G3 any lineup. So, and you saw the best lineup. So, that's sick.
They shred, dude. It was great.
Yeah. And
Kevin, this was awesome, man. I appreciate it.
Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. This was a fantastic conversation. I have one final last question for you, the forever last question. Where can my audience find more from you?
Oh, easy. Just look for me just type in the number 7 minute stories in Google, and the first 3 pages you'll find stuff about it. And there you can follow and listen to my stories every week. What's cool about it is it's my art. This is not paywall. It's just I kind of took a bet early on in my career that my number one goal was to connect with people, tell stories, and give them away. Kind of again, sort of a sacrificial theme, but it's not sacrifice because I get so much back from it. But I built a community that way. So that channel, 7 Minute Stories, is going to be free, open to the public, no paywall, no advertisers, forever. We're building out bonus content over the years because we've grown such a big audience that if they want to take a deeper dive, there's other stuff. But that main channel of a 7 minute story every week is free. So yeah, man, that's how we've grown it word of mouth. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. But find me 7 Minute Stories wherever you the podcast. Apple Podcasts is great. And then also, if you are like most of us are the job seeking or the work life space, I co-created Glassdoor, the company Glassdoor, their flagship podcast, and it's called The Lonely Office. And in less than a year, we've jumped into a top 50 career podcast, and we're kind of becoming the destination for that job seeker who's navigating the messy line between work and life. And so if you're looking for nuanced conversation, apolitical conversation that's just about job seeking and the stuff that we go through in this hybrid/remote world, we're having conversations over there. You can find The Lonely Office wherever you get podcasts too. But those are the two main places, man.
Aaron, thank you so much again for coming on the show. This was an absolute blast.
Thank you.
I know this won't be the last time that you and I talk. So I'll say bye for now, but not bye forever. I look forward to the next time that you and I get to chat.
Yeah, really grateful. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Onto this camera. Aaron,